You wake up in the morning and check your smartphone, which runs on an operating system controlled by a trillion-dollar tech monopoly. You order your groceries or a new pair of shoes with a single click, and the package is delivered by a massive logistics empire that has systematically wiped out thousands of local businesses. If you get sick, you drive to a chain pharmacy to buy a patented, chemical-based pill manufactured by a global pharmaceutical syndicate. As you go about this daily routine, you probably tell yourself that you are a free consumer. You believe you are living in the golden age of competitive free market capitalism, where thousands of companies are fiercely fighting for your money, constantly innovating to make your life better. This is the greatest, most beautifully engineered illusion of the modern world. You are not participating in a free market. You are living inside a highly structured, meticulously designed corporate matrix. And the most terrifying part is not just that this matrix exists, it is the fact that it is running on a piece of financial software written over 150 years ago. When politicians and media pundits talk about the terrifying power of modern mega-corporations, how Amazon crushes independent retailers, how Google controls the flow of global human information, or how Big Pharma dictates the price of human survival, they act as if this is a brand new phenomenon brought about by the internet and advanced technology. They are completely wrong. Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and the billionaire architects of modern big tech did not invent the rules of the game. They did not pioneer the concept of absolute market dominance. They are simply following a deeply hidden historical playbook. To find the true architect of the modern corporate world, you have to look back to the year 1870. You have to look at a ruthless 31-year-old accountant sitting in a small office in Cleveland, Ohio, who controlled a mere 4% of America's oil refining capacity. His name was John D. Rockefeller. Within just one decade, using a level of sociopathic financial brilliance the world had never seen, that 4% would violently explode into 90%. If you read a standard government-approved history textbook, you will be told a comforting fairy tale. The book will tell you that Rockefeller built the Standard Oil Company, became entirely too powerful, and then, in 1911, the heroic United States government stepped in, broke up his evil monopoly, and saved the free market forever. That is a magnificent lie. The system John D. Rockefeller built did not die when Standard Oil was dismantled in 1911. It simply mutated. It evolved. It spread from the oil fields of Pennsylvania into the banking sector of Wall Street, into the medical establishment, into the educational system, and eventually into the digital infrastructure of the Internet itself. The gasoline you pump into your car, the algorithms that decide what you watch, the tax-exempt foundations that dictate global health policies, and the megabanks that hold your life savings, every single one of them operates using the exact same blueprints drafted by Rockefeller in the late 19th century. In this documentary, we are going to open the historical vault and expose the 4-chapter Rockefeller Playbook. We will reveal the exact, ruthless methods of vertical integration, horizontal consolidation, and regulatory capture that allowed one man to literally own the world. And more importantly, we will prove with terrifying modern examples how the exact same playbook is being aggressively executed right now in 2026 to ensure that you can never, ever escape the system. Let's open the playbook. In the sanitized, highly theoretical world of modern business schools, professors teach a concept known as vertical integration. They frame it as a harmless, highly logical method of improving corporate efficiency. But John D. Rockefeller did not invent this concept to be efficient. He invented it to be a weapon of mass economic destruction. To understand the terrifying brilliance of Step 1 in the Rockefeller Playbook, you have to look at how business was done before he completely hijacked the system. In the early days of the Pennsylvania oil boom, refining crude oil was a highly fragmented, chaotic process. A refiner had to buy crude oil from an independent driller, pay a teamster to transport it, buy wooden barrels from an independent cooper, and pay a railroad company to ship the final product to the market. Every single step of that process involved a middleman, And to Rockefeller's sociopathic, accountant-driven mind, a middleman was a parasite stealing his profit margin. Let's look at a seemingly insignificant object, the wooden barrel. In 1870, a standard oil barrel cost a refiner about 25 cents to purchase. Most businessmen simply accepted this as the fixed cost of doing business. Rockefeller, however, refused to pay it. He didn't just negotiate a better price for barrels. He bought the forests. He bought the massive timber tracts. He bought the kilns used to dry the wood. He bought the wagons to transport the timber, and he built his own massive barrel-making factories. By controlling the entire physical supply chain, from the soil in the forest to the floor of the refinery, he dropped his cost per barrel from 25 cents down to under 15 cents. But he didn't stop at the wood. He applied this ruthless, predatory logic to absolutely everything. He bought the chemical plants that produced the sulfuric acid needed for the refining process. He bought the tank cars. When the railroad barons eventually tried to squeeze him for higher shipping rates, he completely bypassed them by building thousands of miles of his own private pipelines. Rockefeller didn't just operate within a market, he became the market. Because he kept every single fractional profit margin in-house, he accumulated a massive, insurmountable cost advantage. This allowed him to engage in predatory pricing. He could comfortably sell his refined kerosene to the public at a price strictly lower than what it literally cost his competitors to produce it. He bled them dry, not by having a fundamentally better product, but by owning the choke points of their existence. Now, fast forward 150 years. You open your laptop and click Buy Now on Amazon. You think you are participating in a modern 21st century digital economy, but you are simply witnessing the Rockefeller Playbook, Step 1, executed on a terrifying global scale. Amazon did not become a multi-trillion-dollar empire by simply being a convenient place to buy books or electronics online. They became an empire by systematically devouring the entire modern supply chain, exactly like Standard Oil. Today, Amazon doesn't just sell you the product. They own the massive million-square-foot fulfillment centers. They bought the robotics companies like Kiva Systems that automate those warehouses. They own the cardboard box manufacturers. They own the massive fleet of blue Prime delivery vans driving through your neighborhood. They own the cargo planes, Amazon Air. They own the payment processing infrastructure. Just like Rockefeller, Jeff Bezos systematically eliminated the middlemen to crush his competitors' operating margins. But modern big tech took Rockefeller's chokepoint strategy one terrifying step further. They built the ultimate invisible pipeline, Amazon Web Services, or AWS. AWS is the foundational cloud computing infrastructure that powers a massive percentage of the entire internet. It is an absolute juggernaut, generating roughly $90 billion in annual revenue. But here is the darkest, most Rockefeller-esque reality of AWS. Thousands of Amazon's direct competitors in the retail and streaming space, like Netflix, literally have to pay Amazon to host their websites. Amazon owns the digital railroads. Look at Apple. They don't just sell you a piece of hardware. They design their own proprietary silicon chips. They code their own closed operating system, and they lock you inside a digital ecosystem where they control the only entrance, the App Store. If a software developer wants to reach 1 billion iPhone users, they have absolutely no choice but to pay Apple a mandatory 30% tax on every single transaction. It is the exact same financial toll booth Rockefeller built in 1870, upgraded for the digital age. The product changed from physical kerosene to digital data, but the ruthless mathematics remain completely identical. If you aggressively control every single stage of production, you do not ever need to compete in a free market. You simply dictate the terms of survival. And once you control the supply chain, you are ready for Step 2, the systematic extermination of your rivals. Once you have successfully executed Step 1 and built an impenetrable vertical supply chain, you possess an overwhelming financial advantage over the rest of the market. You are no longer playing by the same economic rules as everyone else. And this is exactly when the true corporate blood sport begins. Welcome to Step 2 of the Rockefeller Playbook, horizontal consolidation. In the sanitized language of modern Wall Street, they call it mergers and acquisitions. But in reality, it is a very simple, ruthless binary choice presented to your competitors. You either sell your company to me, or I will mathematically annihilate you. To see the original blueprint in action, we must return to the brutal, smoke-filled winter of 1872. John D. Rockefeller had quietly secured his massive, secret railroad rebates. He was refining oil cheaper than anyone else on the planet, and he was ready to weaponize that advantage. He initiated an event so utterly ruthless that historians literally named it the Cleveland Massacre. At the time, Cleveland, Ohio was the absolute center of the American oil refining industry. There were 26 major independent refineries operating in the city. Rockefeller methodically targeted every single one of them. He would walk into the offices of his rival executives, men who had spent their entire lives pouring their blood, sweat, and capital into building their businesses. He didn't bring a weapon, and he didn't raise his voice. He simply brought his accounting ledger. He would open the books and show his rivals the artificially low transportation costs he had secretly negotiated with the railroads. He would demonstrate with cold, sociopathic mathematics that he could easily afford to drop the retail price of his own kerosene far below their actual cost of production. Rockefeller then delivered the ultimate capitalist ultimatum. Sell your refinery to Standard Oil right now at a heavily discounted price, or I will flood the market with cheap oil, bleed my own profit margins for a few months, and drive you into absolute, unrecoverable bankruptcy. It was an impossible choice. Facing total financial ruin, the independent refiners panicked. In the span of just 3 months, John D. Rockefeller devoured 25 of his 26 major competitors. He swallowed their market share, their equipment, and their dignity. He went from controlling 4% of the market to 25% almost overnight. By 1879, using this exact same predatory tactic across the entire country, he controlled a staggering 90% of all American oil refining. He didn't win by building a fundamentally better product. He won by ensuring that competition itself was financially illegal. Now, fast forward to the 21st century. Silicon Valley desperately wants you to believe they are different. They project an image of friendly innovation, colorful ping-pong tables, and organic kombucha on tap. But do not let the casual hoodies fool you. Behind the glass walls of the modern tech campuses, they are running the exact same 1872 software. Look at Mark Zuckerberg and Meta. In 2012, a new, rapidly growing photo-sharing app called Instagram began stealing the one commodity Zuckerberg needed to survive: human attention. It was a direct, existential threat to Facebook's monopoly. Zuckerberg did not try to build a better camera app to compete in the free market. He simply used his massive, Rockefeller-esque capital advantage. He knocked on their door and bought Instagram for $1 billion. 2 years later, when a messaging app called WhatsApp threatened his dominance, he bought them for $19 billion. In internal emails later leaked during a congressional antitrust hearing, Zuckerberg explicitly wrote to his executives that it is fundamentally better to buy than compete. It is the exact same mindset that birthed the Standard Oil monopoly. But what happens when the modern competitor refuses to sell? What happens when they try to fight back? Enter Jeff Bezos and the modern equivalent of the Cleveland Massacre. In the late 2000s, an independent e-commerce company called Quidsi, which operated Diapers.com, was rapidly taking market share away from Amazon in the baby products category. Amazon approached them and offered to buy the company. The founders of Quidsi bravely said no. They wanted to remain independent. So, Bezos activated the 1872 protocol. Amazon deployed pricing bots to track every single item on Diapers.com and immediately slashed Amazon's own diaper prices by up to 30%. Amazon was deliberately choosing to lose hundreds of millions of dollars in a massive price war.
They could comfortably afford to bleed this cash because their other vertically integrated businesses like AWS were generating billions in profit to subsidize the attack. Quidsi, however, did not have a massive cloud computing empire to save them. They were a standalone retail business. They were mathematically suffocated. Within months, their executives realized they were bleeding to death and could not survive Amazon's predatory pricing. The Quidsi board panicked, surrendered, and sold the company to Amazon. The moment the ink was dry on the acquisition, Amazon quietly raised the price of diapers back up. Today, this strategy has been institutionalized into the Amazon Basics program. If a third-party seller invents a great product and becomes highly successful on Amazon's platform, Amazon simply uses their internal data to copy the product, manufactures a cheaper clone, brands it Amazon Basics, and artificially manipulates the search algorithm to ensure their clone ranks at the top of the page. The original creator is driven into bankruptcy, and Amazon absorbs their market share. The oil barons of the 19th century and the data barons of the 21st century share the exact same sociopathic DNA. Horizontal consolidation is never about providing a better product to the consumer. It is entirely about ensuring that the consumer never has a choice in the first place. Once the competition has been bought or buried, the monopoly is almost complete. But to truly solidify your empire, you have to make sure the government can never touch you. You have to write the laws yourself.
There is a comforting bedtime story that modern democracies tell their citizens. We are taught from a very young age that the government acts as the ultimate impartial referee of the free market. We believe that when a corporation becomes too powerful, too greedy, or too dangerous, the righteous lawmakers in Washington will step in, pass strict regulations, and protect the working class. This is perhaps the most dangerous and enduring illusion of the entire matrix. If you want to understand the true nature of global power, you must understand step 3 of the Rockefeller Playbook, regulatory capture. The financial elite do not fear government regulation. They do not fight the law. They simply buy the pen that writes the law. John D. Rockefeller was a pioneer of many ruthless business tactics, but his greatest political innovation was realizing that politicians were vastly cheaper to acquire than competing oil refineries. He viewed the United States government not as an authority to be obeyed, but as just another operational expense on his balance sheet. By the late 19th century, public outrage against Standard Oil was growing. People demanded safety regulations. Rockefeller didn't panic. He saw an opportunity to weaponize the law against his remaining rivals. He actively deployed his army of lobbyists to push for incredibly strict safety standards regarding the flash point of kerosene, the temperature at which the oil would ignite. To the untrained eye of the general public, it looked like Standard Oil was suddenly prioritizing human safety. The newspapers praised the new regulations, but the dark, mathematical reality was entirely different. Standard Oil possessed the massive, expensive, state-of-the-art refining equipment required to easily meet these strict new flashpoint standards. The small independent refiners scattered across the country did not. They simply could not afford the multi-million-dollar infrastructure upgrades required to comply with the new laws. Rockefeller successfully lobbied the government to legally ban his competitors' products under the guise of public safety. He used the federal government as his own personal enforcement arm, turning competition into a literal crime. Fast forward to the year 2026. The oil barons have been replaced by the data barons, the pharmaceutical cartels, and the megabanks of Wall Street. But the playbook has not changed a single sentence. Look at the modern pharmaceutical industry. The public blindly trusts the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, assuming it is an independent government watchdog protecting them from dangerous chemicals. The terrifying reality is completely the opposite. In 1992, Congress passed a piece of legislation called the Prescription Drug User Fee Act.
This law legally allowed pharmaceutical companies to directly fund the FDA by paying user fees to expedite the drug approval process. Today, nearly half of the FDA's entire budget for reviewing human drugs comes directly from the very pharmaceutical billionaires they are supposed to be regulating. It is a legalized, symbiotic financial loop. Big Pharma pays the salaries of the government scientists who approve their trillion-dollar patented drugs. And when those 20-year patents are about to expire, allowing cheap generic versions to enter the market and save human lives, Big Pharma deploys their lobbyists. They use a tactic called evergreening, making a tiny, medically insignificant change to a drug's chemical structure, and then lobbying the patent office to grant them a brand new 20-year monopoly. They literally write the intellectual property laws that force a diabetic patient to pay hundreds of dollars for a vial of insulin that costs $3 to manufacture. But nowhere is the Rockefeller Playbook more blatantly executed than on Wall Street. Following the devastating 2008 financial collapse, which wiped out the savings of millions of working-class families, the public demanded that the megabanks be permanently leashed. The government responded with a massive, highly publicized piece of regulation called the Dodd-Frank Act. Politicians went on television and proudly declared that the era of reckless banking was over. But the banks didn't panic. They deployed their lobbyists. A few years later, deep inside a massive, must-pass government funding bill, a crucial provision was quietly slipped in that rolled back a major rule regulating how banks traded highly risky derivatives. When investigative journalists analyzed the text of that specific provision, they discovered a terrifying truth. The government had not written the law. 70 lines of the bill were a direct word-for-word copy from a document drafted by lobbyists working for Citigroup, one of the largest banks on earth. The bank literally wrote the law that regulated the bank, and the politicians simply signed it. Even modern big tech utilizes this exact strategy. When you see billionaire CEOs like Mark Zuckerberg or Sam Altman sitting before Congress actively asking the government to regulate social media or artificial intelligence, they are not experiencing a sudden moral awakening. They are executing step 3 of the playbook. They know that massive 1,000-page regulatory frameworks act as the ultimate corporate moat. A trillion-dollar empire like Meta or Google can easily afford to hire 5,000 compliance lawyers to navigate a complex new privacy law, but a brilliant college student in a garage trying to build the next revolutionary tech startup cannot afford that legal overhead. Heavy regulation does not punish the monopoly. It permanently protects the monopoly by making it financially impossible for new competition to enter the arena. Once you control the supply chain, destroy your competitors, and legally buy the government, there is only one final step required to complete the matrix. You have to make sure the public absolutely loves you for doing it.
There is a fatal flaw in the architecture of absolute corporate dominance. When you successfully conquer the entire supply chain, annihilate all of your competitors, and purchase the politicians who are supposed to regulate you, you inevitably create a massive public relations nightmare. You become the villain. By the early 20th century, John D. Rockefeller had won capitalism, but he was universally despised. The American public viewed him as a cold-blooded corporate sociopath. This hatred reached a boiling point in 1914 during the Ludlow Massacre, when heavily armed guards, paid for by the Rockefeller family, opened fire on striking coal miners and their families in Colorado. Dozens of men, women, and children were slaughtered. The public outrage was apocalyptic. Mobs threatened to march on Rockefeller's estate and hang him in the streets. Rockefeller realized that raw financial power and political bribery were no longer enough to protect him. If he wanted his empire to survive, he needed to fundamentally manipulate human perception. He needed the public to actually love him. Welcome to Step 4 of the Rockefeller Playbook, the Philanthropy Shield.
Rockefeller hired a man named Ivy Lee, widely considered the founder of modern public relations. Lee taught the ruthless billionaire the ultimate survival tactic for the ultra-wealthy. He instructed Rockefeller to carry a pocket full of shiny dimes and hand them out to poor children on the street while newspaper photographers conveniently snapped pictures. But the dimes were just a distraction. The true masterstroke came in 1913 when he funneled $250 million, the equivalent of over $7 billion today, into a brand new tax-exempt entity called the Rockefeller Foundation. To the untrained eye of the working class, this looked like the greatest act of charity in human history. The newspapers, completely manipulated by his PR machine, suddenly hailed the most hated man in America as a visionary humanitarian. But behind the shield of philanthropy, the foundation was actually the greatest legal loophole ever engineered. By moving his billions into a tax-exempt trust, Rockefeller legally permanently shielded his vast wealth from the government's estate taxes. He didn't lose his money, he simply moved it from his left pocket into his right pocket, where the IRS could no longer touch it. More terrifyingly, he used that exact same charitable money to actively dictate global policy. The Rockefeller Foundation poured millions into universities, hospitals, and medical research. But as we saw earlier, this funding came with strict conditions. He used his charity to actively suppress holistic medicine and artificially establish the petrochemical, pharmaceutical model that dominates the globe today. He bought the entire medical establishment, and the public applauded him for it. He proved that if you label a corporate takeover as philanthropy, nobody will ever question your motives. Now look at the modern billionaire class. Look at Bill Gates. Look at Mark Zuckerberg. Look at Warren Buffett. They all stand in front of the cameras and proudly signed the Giving Pledge, promising to give away 99% of their wealth to charity before they die. The media praises them as modern-day saints, but they are simply running the exact same 1913 software. When Mark Zuckerberg announced he was giving away 99% of his Facebook shares, he did not give that money to a traditional charity. He transferred it to the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. But CZI is not a nonprofit foundation. It is a limited liability company. This means it can legally invest in pro-profit companies, make undisclosed political donations, and aggressively lobby lawmakers to change public policy, all while maintaining absolute control over the capital and securing massive tax benefits. When Bill Gates funnels tens of billions of dollars into the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he is executing the ultimate Rockefeller maneuver. The Gates Foundation is now one of the most powerful entities on planet Earth. It heavily dictates global public health policy, the World Health Organization, and agricultural standards in developing nations. Think about the sheer undemocratic horror of this reality. Bill Gates was never elected by a single voter. He has no medical degree. Yet, because he used a tax-exempt foundation to shield his tech fortune, he holds more direct power over global health policies than the leaders of sovereign nations. Philanthropy at this scale is not charity. It is the complete privatization of global policy. It is a mechanism that allows the ultra-wealthy to avoid paying taxes to a democratic government and instead use those exact same untaxed billions to shape the laws, the schools, and the medical systems of the entire world according to their own personal ideologies. Rockefeller invented the shield. The modern tech billionaires simply perfected it. If you are realizing for the first time that the entire economic system is a carefully constructed illusion, and if you want to understand exactly how the elite use these hidden historical loopholes to control your money, your health, and your future, you need to subscribe to the channel right now. Hit the bell icon. We are consistently tearing down the corporate propaganda that the mainstream media is too terrified to touch. Join us and never be blind to the matrix again.
We have reached the final layer of the corporate matrix. You have seen how the elites control the supply chain, annihilate the competition, write their own regulations, and buy the public's love through tax-exempt philanthropy. But there is one final, desperate hope that the public clings to.
Every few years, a populist politician will step up to a podium, point their finger at the multi-trillion-dollar tech monopolies in Silicon Valley, and declare, "We need to break them up." The crowd cheers. The media writes sensational headlines. The public genuinely believes that the government is finally going to save them. But history tells us a very different, deeply terrifying story. Breaking up a monopoly does not destroy the matrix, it upgrades it. In 1911, the United States Supreme Court delivered what the newspapers hailed as the ultimate victory for the working class. Under the Sherman Antitrust Act, the court officially declared Standard Oil an illegal monopoly and ordered its immediate dissolution. The ruling mandated that John D. Rockefeller's colossal empire be forcibly broken up into 34 separate, independent companies. The politicians took victory laps. The public celebrated the return of the free market, completely convinced that the evil tyrant had been financially ruined. But Rockefeller was not ruined. In fact, he was laughing. He understood a fundamental mathematical glitch in the capitalist system that the cheering public completely failed to grasp. When the government forced Standard Oil to break apart into companies that you know today as Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and Amoco, they did not confiscate Rockefeller's property. As the founder and majority shareholder, Rockefeller was simply handed massive blocks of stock in all 34 of the newly formed baby standards. Before the breakup, Standard Oil was viewed as a massive, heavily regulated monopoly, which artificially suppressed its overall stock price. But the moment those 34 companies became separate entities and hit the open stock market, Wall Street went absolutely insane. Furthermore, Henry Ford's Model T automobile was just starting to roll off the assembly lines, creating a sudden, exponential global demand for gasoline. The valuations of the 34 separated companies violently exploded. They were collectively worth vastly more apart than they ever were together. In the years following the Supreme Court's punishment, the value of Rockefeller's stock portfolio doubled, then tripled, and then quadrupled. The government's attempt to destroy him mathematically backfired, instantly transforming John D. Rockefeller into the first certified billionaire in human history. He proved that you can dissolve a corporation on paper, but you cannot dissolve the underlying financial leverage of its architect. Now apply that exact same mathematical glitch to the modern world. When a politician threatens to break up Amazon, what do you think will actually happen? If the government forces Amazon to split, Jeff Bezos does not lose his wealth. He simply handed separate shares in Amazon Retail, Amazon Logistics, and the ultimate cash cow, Amazon Web Services. Freed from the regulatory burden of being a single monopoly, the stock price of AWS alone would violently skyrocket. Bezos and the institutional shareholders would double their net worth almost overnight. If you force Alphabet to split into Google Search, YouTube, and Android, the exact same wealth explosion occurs. The 1911 glitch proves that antitrust laws are nothing more than political theater. Breaking up the megacorporations does not return power to the people, it simply multiplies the wealth of the exact same apex predators sitting at the top of the food chain. John D. Rockefeller built the architecture of modern corporate control over 150 years ago, and you cannot escape it because the elites who run the system are using his exact playbook today. But if you think billionaires like Bezos, Zuckerberg, or Gates are the ultimate bosses of this game, you are still only looking at the middle management. If you trace the ownership of every single megacorporation on Earth, from the tech giants to the defense contractors to the banks and the pharmaceutical cartels, they all funnel up to an invisible, multi-trillion-dollar syndicate that operates entirely in the shadows. If you want to understand who truly owns the world and discover the one financial entity that makes even Wall Street titans look small, you need to watch my full breakdown right here. The only company bigger than BlackRock, the Vanguard mystery. Click the video on your screen right now or find the exact link down in the pinned comment below. The Rockefeller Playbook was just the beginning. I will see you in that video to uncover the final boss of the global economy.